All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're cutting through all the noise to look at a conflict that could seriously reshape the global economy. We're going to break down the high-stakes chess match between Iran, the United States, and Israel, focusing on the core strategies, the key pressure points, and, what could actually happen next.
Now you might be thinking, why does a conflict so far away matter to me? Well, that question is really at the heart of this whole thing. As we're about to see, what happens in one small corner of the world can create massive shockwaves that affect pretty much everyone. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the spark that lit this whole fire. Then we'll dive into Iran's pretty clever and definitely unconventional war plan. After that, we'll get to the one trump card they have that impacts the whole world, understand why this strategy is such a massive gamble, and finally, try to figure out where this is all heading.
So how did we get here? How did things spiral out of control so fast? Let's quickly trace the events that brought us to this really dangerous moment.
It all kicked off on February 28th, when US and Israeli bombs started hitting Iran. Tehran didn't wait long to respond. They launched missile strikes that, and this is a big deal, actually managed to get past Israel's top-of-the-line defenses. From there, the fight just spilled over the borders. Iran started hitting targets in neighboring countries. We're talking oil fields, airports, you name it. And all of that led to where we are right now. The Strait of Hormuz is basically shut down, a move that has put the entire world on edge.
Okay, so this brings us to Iran's strategy. See, they know they can't win a straight-up, conventional fight against a superpower like the US, so they're not even trying to. Instead, they're fighting a different kind of war.
The heart of their whole plan is something called horizontal escalation. Here's an easy way to think about it. Instead of getting into a direct boxing match with the US, Iran is like throwing punches at people all around the ring. They attack neighboring countries not because they want a war with them, but to create so much chaos in the region that it forces the US to back off, basically making the fight too messy and too expensive to be worth it.
And this whole strategy is built on 5 key pillars. First, their military command is spread out, so it's hard to take down with one single blow. Second, as we saw, their missiles can actually get through really good defenses. Third, they attack their neighbors to widen the problem. Fourth, they are absolute masters at using geography to their advantage, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And finally, their targeting doctrine is simple: an eye for an eye. You hit their banks, they hit banks linked to you. It's all designed to make them a very resilient and very painful opponent to fight.
And that point about geography, well, that brings us to the single biggest piece of leverage Iran has. This is the trump card in this entire conflict.
1/5. Just let that sink in. Not 1/5 of a country's oil, but 1/5, 20% of the entire world's oil supply has to squeeze through this one tiny little waterway. That's just a staggering amount of the energy that our world runs on, all concentrated in one spot. The Strait of Hormuz is the perfect example of what's called a maritime choke point. It's basically a bottleneck for global trade. And because of its location, Iran has the power to shut it down, or at the very least, make it incredibly risky for ships to pass through. This gives them an enormous lever they can pull that affects literally everybody, not just their enemies.
And here's what's so wild. According to Professor Marin Kamrova, it's not like this was a secret weapon. Iran has been threatening to do this for years. The shocking part is that the US seems to have completely underestimated that they would actually play this card when things got serious.
So yeah, this strategy is powerful, but it is also incredibly risky. Iran is walking on a razor's edge here, and just one wrong move could plunge the whole region into absolute chaos. So here's the fundamental problem. From Iran's point of view, the logic is pretty straightforward. If you let the US use your country to launch attacks against us, well then, you're part of the war. But for those Gulf nations getting hit, their patience is, running out really fast. This whole eye for an eye thing risks dragging everyone into a much bigger, much more destructive war.
And as Professor Farzad Zarati from the University of Tehran explains it, the hope inside Iran is that their neighbors will see this as a defensive move, that Iran is just fighting for its own survival. They're hoping the neighbors will pressure the US to back down instead of joining the fight themselves.
But, and this is a huge but, Professor Kamraval points out that this could completely backfire. He says it's an extremely risky strategy because if these attacks keep happening, it could be the final straw that makes countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE officially jump into the war against Iran. And that would escalate things to a whole new level.
So with the stakes this high, where does this all go? What's the endgame? Let's look at the 3 most likely ways this whole dangerous confrontation could play out.
Basically, it looks like there are 3 paths forward. The first is negotiation.
Apparently there are talks happening behind the scenes, with countries like Turkey and Egypt acting as go-betweens. That could lead to some kind of shaky peace deal. The second path is a limited military action by the US, something low-risk, high-visibility, like maybe occupying a small Iranian island. That would let the US claim a win and push for a ceasefire. And then there's the third path, the absolute worst-case scenario, a wider war, where the Gulf states get involved, maybe even NATO allies, which would be, well, a catastrophe for everybody.
And what makes predicting any of this so difficult is this one surprising fact. Even after weeks of being bombed, Iran's military is holding up way better than anyone expected. They're still launching missiles and drones, partly because a lot of their factories are built deep underground where they're really hard to destroy. This resilience means a quick, clean win for either side is probably off the table.
And that really brings us to the core problem here. When you have a situation where both sides can hurt each other badly, but neither side can land a knockout punch, the whole idea of winning kind of falls apart. It leaves us all with this final critical question. In a conflict where there's no clear winner, what does victory even look like? The answer to that is something that's going to affect all of us.